So one update on our new movers. As many of you know, we have a ministry and a work to reach out to those who move into our area so that we can see as a congregation how we can serve them and help them. And for the month of September and October, we were able to get 90 plus new names of individuals and families who have moved in within a 2.5 mile radius of this building. And in the month of September thus far, we've been able to make 30 visits, and 16 contacts out of those 30 visits have been made with individuals, and at least up until today, 35 cards have been written and mailed by various members of this congregation to our 16 new neighbors. Just the fact that our area continues to grow, church, is just an amazing, amazing gift of God. The people are coming and making this place their home, and that we don't have to go very far in order to make an impact and a difference in the lives of our neighbors. 2.5 miles, and it's amazing that 90 people, right? And again, this varies from an individual to a family of 4 or whatever it may be. But there's a lot that's going on. Wanted to give you a brief update, and if you are eager and if you want to be part of this in any capacity, that you just let me know afterwards. And this was a great way for us to reach out and to help our neighbors to be at home. When trouble comes to your doorstep, how do you respond with your heart? When trouble comes to the doorstep, where's your mind go? When trouble arrives, especially an unexpected trouble, and then especially a trouble that arrives just simply because you did something good. Where does your mind go, and how does your heart respond? For the last several months, we've been going through the book of Acts, which, if you don't know this, is a history of the first century church. Jesus promised to build the church in the Gospel of Matthew, and that no matter what came against that church, that even hell itself, it would not prevail against it, that the church would always stand. He promised the church, but he never promised that it would always be easy. And part of the history that is written in the book of Acts is to show that there are times where the church experiences amazing highs, such as 3,000 people who arise and are baptized and have their sin washed away. That's an amazing high. That's the equivalent of reaching the top of Mount Everest. But there are some amazing lows in the life of the church. Last week, Charlie led us through conflict on what happens internally, and those are low moments in a local church, when there is conflict among members and how we handle that conflict. And where we're going to find ourselves in Acts chapter 16 is another low, but this time from the outside. Trouble does arrive at our doorstep as individuals and as families, but it also can arrive at the doorstep of the church. Sometimes it can just simply be the antagonism of the society around. For others, it can be just the fact that a member, and some of us know this, it could be a member, a valued member who passes before his time, and it shakes us to our very core. When that happens, where does the heart of the church go? Where does the mind of the church go? In Acts chapter 16, the Apostle Paul and his traveling companion, a man by the name of Silas, they are traveling and they are sharing the gospel, and they come across a young girl who is possessed by a demon. But they find out that in addition to this possession, that she is also possessed by people who are controlling her, and sadly who are using her for financial gain. So as they should, they do the right thing. They give her, as to use the buzzword of the day, they bring justice to her life. Through the power of Christ and the Spirit that's in them, they cast out the demon, but that gains the attention of those who are using her for financial gain. Those individuals who have now lost their source of income immediately move Paul and Silas to the top of the most wanted list. And not only do they move them to the list, and not only do they make them public enemy number 1, they actually start beating them for it. They will say in a group of people in the city that they're in verse 20, at the end of verse 20, that they, Paul and Silas, they're disturbing our city. They're not bringing peace. They're not good for us. They're not doing all of these things. They are just bad for us. Now keep in mind, they have a selfish reason because they've lost their money. They've lost their source of income. They have no problem using people and abusing, and now Paul and Silas are the target. What they do is nothing short of amazing because they're able within just a verse to turn the entire city against them. They are so compelling of how bad Paul and Silas are for the group of people in this city that in verse 22 the crowd joins in attacking Paul and Silas. And I look at how these attacks look. It's not just verbal. The magistrates themselves, even the leaders of the city, everybody's joining in. And they play tug of war with Paul and Silas to the point that they rip their clothes. If it follows suit within any Roman city, they are beaten with rods. And Rome has no limits on anything. So if you take the hardest stick, if you can take the worst switch that you've ever had, if you can take the thickest and hardest leather belt and imagine any and all of that, and then now imagine an entire city, leaders included, they're all joining in to make your life as miserable as possible. At the least, your clothes are torn and battered and stretched. At the worst, you may even be almost nude in front of everybody. Their goal is to shame you. Their goal is to hurt you. Their goal is to do everything they can short of killing you. What do you do when life does that to you from your perspective? Life is playing tug of war with you and your family. Life is leaving you torn and battered and stretched. Life is pulling you in 1,000, maybe even 1,000,000 different directions. It seems like it's just one after another, after another, after another. Where does your heart go? Where does your mind go? And on top of all of that, you're put into prison. Because that's their reward. They free a 12-year-old girl from a demon possession and from being used by people in her life to make money off of her. And their reward is to be beaten, torn, and thrown into prison. Your reward for following God, your reward for just simply doing what you know to do, which is right and good and true, the reward that life brings to your doorstep, the reward that the enemy brings to your doorstep is to create a little prison that, at least to you from your vantage point, doesn't look like you're going to break free anytime soon. Where does your heart go? Where does your mind go? How do you respond with your heart? How do you respond with your mind? There are a lot of ways in which we probably do that. For some of us, we just internalize everything. We keep it ourselves. We put on the brave face. If our clothes have been tattered, we put on the metaphorical clean clothes and we put it all together and we got the smile on the face and somebody says, "How are you doing?" "I'm fine." And we may even go and embellish a little bit. Fantastic. Everything's going well. Perhaps we get busy with something else. I'm going to take my mind off of it. I don't want my mind to go anywhere, so I'm going to go do this so that my mind can go somewhere else. Maybe I put my hands in the dirt of my garden. Maybe I put my hands on the lawnmower and go cut grass, or the weed eater and weed eat. Maybe I go find a project that doesn't really need to be done, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm just doing something to take my mind off of it. Maybe we literally get out of town for a few days. There's all kinds of ways in which we respond. And as a church, we're tempted to kind of do some of the same things when trouble arrives at our doorstep. Again, how do I respond with my heart, and where does my mind go? Because if I get out of town for a few days, I still got to come back into town, right? Still got to go to a job. If I put my hands in the dirt so I can take my mind off of something and garden and prune and all of that, eventually the sun goes down, I got to come back in. I can only internalize so much before it comes out. Same again, principles apply for us as a church, and the questions are still overbearing. When all of this happens, how do I respond with my heart? And where does my mind go? As a congregation, how do we respond with our heart, and where does our mind go? And you would think, oh, we're about to see something amazing, that something spectacular, and it really is. But it's so normal that it doesn't quite shake us the way that it probably should. After being beaten all day, clothes barely hanging on, most likely haven't eaten, around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns. How? How can you sing when your body's bleeding and oozing? How can you pray to a God who look like other people are the ones calling the shots at the moment? And it's midnight. Anybody been awake at midnight this week, at least at one point in time? Yeah? Several hands. And everyone in the overflow probably had that as well. There are some of us who chose to be up at midnight, and then there's the rest of us that were woken up. And I have this bad problem that when I wake up, it's hard for me to go back to sleep. It just really is. And somehow, some way, don't you just seem to be waking up with your thoughts just running? Have you ever noticed that too? Midnight amplifies everything. But so does 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and 3 a.m., and so forth and so on. Just night has a way of amplifying everything. I want to be able to pray and to sing in moments like that, and I'm pretty sure you do too. How? If this is how their heart responds, this is where their mind goes. Silas, what are we supposed to do? Paul, I think we'll sing. Paul, what do we do with this? We're chained to a wall. We've got these jailers here. We're public enemy number one. What do we do? Well, Silas, I think why our bodies are bruised and battered and throbbing, and our minds are going a million miles at a moment, I think we'll pray. How? How do you sing and how do you pray there? Which is the question we all want to know. Because the answer to where our heart should be and where our mind should be is that. It should be here. What I want to know is how, and you probably want to as well. Yale did a study several years ago of powerful words. Did you know that Yale said, at least according to their study, the single most powerful word is the word you? According to their study, the single most powerful word is you. They went on and came up with other words like the word because, or the word act, or the word belief. I'm surprised belief didn't make number one, but it made the top 7 lists that they were putting in terms of the 7 most powerful words according to their study. What would you say is the 7 most powerful words? Somebody were to say, I need a powerful word to live by. I need a theme word. What would you say? How would you answer that question? Could I say for all of us as a church that there's not a powerful word in the sense like you, an individual word, but there is a powerful word that is found within your scripture, and it's actually a sentence that contains 7 words. And that if you will do these 7 words, if you will live by these 7 words, and if you will believe these 7 words, that no matter how much trouble comes to your doorstep, and no matter how many things are coming against you, and even us as a congregation, if we will be resolute within the combination of these 7 words, we'll be able to sing when we don't feel like singing. And we'll be able to pray when we don't feel like praying. You want to know what those 7 words are? Acts 13:30, but God raised Jesus from the dead. Those are the most powerful and 7 words you will hear, not just today, but for the rest of your life. These men are stuck in prison at the mercy of chains on their feet, on their ankles. Bodies are throbbing from being beaten and tossed like rag dolls. Everybody else is dictating to them where they go, how they go, when they eat, when they don't eat, all of those things. Every moment of their life is shadowed by somebody beyond them. And yet they sing and they pray, and I would put before all of us that the reason they are able to do that is because they lived by this. But God raised Jesus from the dead. When trouble arrives at our doorstep and when we're having all of these things, this is what the church gathers to do. This is what the church gathers to remember. But God raised Jesus from the dead, because when we internalize, as an example, when trouble comes our way and we internalize, it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets more overwhelming and it gets more overwhelming and it cannot be contained. But it's not just the it that we're trying to contain. We become more negative. We become more cynical. We become less optimistic, obviously. We become more frustrated. We become more angry. We become whatever it is because we've internalized. And it's got to go somewhere. And these words remind us of a greater reality. What's greater than my body that's throbbing right now? What's greater than Paul's body throbbing because he was beaten with a rod? Is there anything greater than that? Is there anything greater that when he's sitting in the cell and he sees this whelp that's raised? Anybody ever hit your head and you've just got this big old knot, or have seen that before? What's greater than that big knot? Is there anything greater? And we start looking at this and it really becomes a question. Is there something greater than whatever this is? When death happens, is there something greater than death? When ruin happens in life, is there something greater than that? When you get up in the morning, and I don't know if that's the case, but you get called into the office by your employer. I'm sorry, the economy is not where it is, and we're having to downsize. Here's your package for the next 3 months. Is there anything greater than that? Because if you've been on the receiving end of that type of news, you don't ever want to be there again. Is there something greater than that? Is there something on the other side? These are all the questions. Is there something greater than magistrates who are tearing our clothes? Is there something greater than a whole city attacking us? And the answer over and over and over is yes. It's this. But God raised Jesus from the dead. And we can sing and we can pray because that's exactly what Jesus is. He's alive. Prayer connects us to the one who brings life from death. But it's not just Jesus in terms of his resurrection. Have you ever considered Jesus? Paul and Silas, when they pray and when they sing, all they're doing is following Jesus' example. Did you know that Jesus had his own midnight? Would you be interested to know that Jesus did both sing and pray at midnight? After communion in the upper room, the very last thing he does with his disciples in John 17 is pray. In Luke 22 and verse 41, he goes to the garden. And not once, not twice, but 3 times he prays. And even on the cross, not chains, but nails, he still prays. What should your heart and mind be doing with the trouble that is at your doorstep right now? This is what Jesus does. How could followers of Jesus do anything different than Jesus? How can followers of Jesus do anything different from him? All the Gospels record that he prays. The text will go on in terms of singing. You know, Ohio University did a study on their school is known for music therapy. And science has revealed a lot about music, and they notice from a mental health perspective, music helps to relax and it helps to reduce levels of stress and anxiety and worry. From a physical rehabilitation, it helps to restore some motor function, and there are some suggestions from the science that it may even help reduce the physical pain that some people are in. But you and I don't need science to know that, because when you had a bad day this week, you went and found your favorite song on Spotify or Pandora or Apple Music. And when you had a great day, you sang along with your song that came on. Music has a way of taking what's on the inside and getting it out. Truth is that it's not some of us that internalize, it's all of us that internalize. But it's got to go somewhere. And music is one of the great outlets that helps us get it somewhere. It's specifically church music, hymns, songs, spiritual songs. I wonder what it would look like for your daily playlist to have certain songs. So they could, spiritual songs, church songs. Not to leave that just among here. But even if you did, I love how Paul, in one of the great glimpses into the worship life of the church, of the assembly, he says, "What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn." And he goes through a list of things that we've kind of incorporated all these years later, what makes a church worship the way that it's supposed to. But he says this, when he ties a bow on all of it, he says, at the end of the day, whatever the church does together, it's to be done for building up. That's what it's done for. The scripture reading, the praying, the giving, and yes, even the singing is not to say that we worshiped correctly. To do that is to reduce it to something that God never intended it to be. The whole purpose of everything that we do is for those last words. All things be done for building up. It is not a coincidence that when Jesus makes his way after he prays in John 17 and before he arrives in the garden, that they sung a hymn. The first thing on his mind as he's literally taking his steps to the cross and the events of the cross is to sing. And his disciples, years later in a prison, in an inner prison, shackled and beaten and hungry and tired and exhausted and most likely tempted to give up, their reaction is to sing. I wonder what it would look like for us to do the same thing. What would it look like for us to have the same? I love the idea and the image that these men at midnight are doing that. And you know who gets the idea of singing more than anybody else? Mamas. Because they're up at midnight. They're up again at 1 and 2 and 3. And we as dads are there sometimes. But mamas get it. Because for whatever it is, there are some times where our children responded to the song. And maybe you didn't sing it at all in terms of words. Maybe you just hummed it. But you know, and you remember. All of that happened at that moment for them. What would it do for us? To sing. To be reminded of the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Singing takes us out of the internalization. It keeps us from going over the edge of being a victim to our own circumstances. It keeps us. It provides a guardrail and a barrier so that we are not overcome with grief or anger or frustration or stress. Singing allows us to express how we feel, but it also takes us to a higher plane. And even for 2 or 3 moments, minutes for those of us that have sung along with the song on our playlist, whatever that is, you do feel better. And even if you said to yourself, much less to someone who was listening to you, well, I'm glad that song came just right at the right time. Hymns are that way as well. And the last thing, when it's all said and done, you never know who's listening and you never know who's watching. The last thing we think about when pain and trouble and trials and struggle comes our way is that it's going to be used for the good of someone else. How can what's bad in my life be used in the good for the good in someone else's life. But that's an easy question to answer. You know that? The bad in Jesus' life was used for the good in our life. Isn't that the gospel? It was bad to be tried unfairly. It was bad to be stripped. It was bad to be nailed. It was bad to be mocked. It was bad to be all of that. And yet, this is a room full of people, a building full of people who are recipients of the good that came out of the bad. One of the last things we think about from that perspective is what's the good that comes out of the bad, but especially good for someone else. But singing and praying give us in a frame of mind and a frame of heart that reminds us that God does bring good out of the bad, but especially for those who are listening and those who are watching. And you just never know who they are. And it happens that there are prisoners who are listening, but that's not the focus. Most likely, Paul and Silas were chained to a jailer. That's how Roman prison worked. Keep you from escaping, you were chained to another human being. Could you imagine your job description? If you're applying for a Roman prison, I'm going to be a Roman prison guard. By the way, part of your job is to be chained to the prisoner. We'll pay you to be a prisoner with the prisoner. But that's most likely what this jailer was. And when the earthquake happens and everything falls apart, the jailer goes to pull out his sword, and he's going to commit suicide. Because it's better to do that than have failed at my job. I'm going to die anyway. I might as well die at my own hand. And Paul and Silas tell him to stop. Because even though things are literally falling apart for this man, they're really not falling apart. Because he has been influenced by hearing singing and praying, and I want what they got. Sword in one hand, taking my life in the other. That's all I think I can do. And singing and praying remind me that there's another way. And that other way is always God's way. It's not a coincidence and it's not a wonder that he says, once he brings them out, what do I got to do to be saved? And for him, it isn't just simply being saved from sin. I want to be saved so that I can have the bold joy. So when it falls apart again, I know what to do. And I don't reach for the sword because that jailer, his heart and his mind went immediately to the sword and to take his own life. That's where his heart and where his mind went. And it touches him that these two men, after all the events of the day that this jailer was most likely privy to, they're still singing and they're praying. You never know who's listening. You never know who's watching. And you never know what it leads to. I know this is difficult, but our God brings amazing things out of what looks like very terrible situations. And they are terrible, but he brings amazing things. And singing and praying remind us of that. So at the end, what do you want me to do? What do I want us to do? How do we respond to all of this? For those of you that are not Christians, I want you to consider Jesus and his gospel, specifically the resurrection. All of this joy, this amazing outlook that Paul and Silas have, the outward fruit of singing and praying, it's all because of Jesus, but it's because they're tied to Jesus. These are blessings that are found only in Jesus, but specifically his resurrection. If you are here this morning and you want to consider that, we're open. We're open because that's what Jesus wants for you. He doesn't want you to be the jailer who continues to, as life falls apart, to think that there's some other solution. Jesus is the solution. Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the reason. And there's a room full of people who could tell you that, and we want to share that with you. If you want to know about that, you let us know. And if today's the day to rise and be baptized, fantastic. We want to join you in that and help you. But for the rest of us, those of us that are disciples, followers of Jesus, just like Paul and Silas, will you begin and end your day with Acts 13:30? Will you go ahead and set a reminder on your phone? Use that technology. Use it for everything else. Use it for this. Siri, remind me at whatever time to read Acts 13:30. Can you do that? If they are the 7 most powerful words that we've gathered together to hear today, it's going to be the same powerful words as you begin your day tomorrow. And they will be the same powerful words as you will end your day tomorrow. Set a reminder. But God raised Jesus from the dead. Sometimes you just need to hear that. There's a piece of wisdom that was mentioned in our men's class this morning. Sometimes you just need to hear the same thing over and over and over, and sometimes you just need to go do it over and over and over. It's a good piece of wisdom. And I'm glad it was shared with us in that men's class. I wonder what every day would look like if I began and end with the words, but God raised Jesus from the dead. Why don't you go do that? And then last, why don't you set aside 5 minutes? 1 minute for prayer and 3 to 4 minutes for a hymn. 5 minutes. Most hymns are 3 to 4 minutes. Most songs, Christian songs, 3 minutes tops, 3:30. 5 minutes over a 24-hour period. All I'm asking, 5 minutes. One prayer. And if you don't know how to pray, write it down. There's absolutely nothing wrong with writing down what you want to say. But 1 minute for prayer and 3 to 4 minutes with a hymn. You got a playlist? Just add it in to the playlist. Be reminded of a God who sits on a throne. Be reminded of the story that's there. If you have a need, why don't you come as we stand and sing?